Nina, kindly you follow with other people and
Okay, sir.
so thank you very much, sir. If you give permission, we start. And
Of course.
It's a like let me thank you profusely on behalf of all the students, teachers, and also in this Indian Law Institute for accepting our kind request. And despite your busy schedule, you found some time for us to share on the human rights. It's very important, and we have grown actually. Like I remember when I was a student, I read many articles which you were published in the International Commission of Jurists. Like earlier it used to come, now that has been stopped in other
Yes.
places. So I read many articles, and even in thesis, me and my colleagues, they have cited you. So we are very privileged and honored to have you today here. And God is kind enough that we got a chance to interact with both of us, and then we are here. Let me introduce to audience to Professor Dr. Bertrand Ramcharan. Sir was Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights and Assistant Secretary General when Mr. Sergio Melo, then High Commissioner, and Sergio Melo was killed in 19th August 2000 during the attack on the United Nations headquarters in Baghdad in year 2003. So some of you might have noticed also that incident wherein a High Commissioner of the Human Rights, I think he was second High Commissioner, maybe second or third High Commissioner, who was killed in the conflict zone in Baghdad. And after his death, respected Ramcharan sir has assumed the post of acting High Commissioner for Human Rights, which he held until July 2004, when a new High Commissioner was appointed. So till 2004, for a year, sir was the acting High Commissioner for Human Rights. And so when we talk about the human rights, this is the top body in the world which takes care of the human rights. And High Commissioner for Human Rights, the highest post in the international level, particularly for the human promotion and protection of human rights. So we are very privileged to have you here. And sir has been for more than 3 decades associated with the United Nations and served in this Center for Human Rights as a special in various positions. Sir has done that. And he was also director of the Office of the Special Representative for the Secretary General in United Nations PROFOR, the largest ever United Nations peacekeeping operation. As director of the International Conference in the former Yugoslavia, also as a political advisor to the peace negotiation in the Yugoslavia conflict, and as a director in the United Nations Political Department, focusing on conflicts in there. Sir is also a barrister in Lincoln's Inn and has a doctorate in international law from the London School of Economics and Political Science. And that's a long time back in 1973. Sir was a commissioner of the International Commission of Jurists, which just I mentioned, from 1991 to 1998, and has been a member of Permanent Court of Arbitration since 1996. He was adjunct professor of international human rights law at Columbia University, and he has written or edited some 20 books and numerous articles. And he holds the diploma in international law of the Hague of international law of the Hague Academy of International Law, where he has also been director of studies. List goes on, so I'll not continue. I'll seek permission of sir to stop here. But it's a great moment for all of us to first time hearing something from a person who worked extensively in the field and who is very much aware that in and out of the human rights
यार
diplomacy,
दिए तो हैं इंटरव्यू से खाली
politics, and human rights implementation. So we are very privileged to have you with us today,
वो लिया
and
क्या
we
नाम है
look
रूबी का
forward to
लियाकत
hear
ने भी
the
लिया था
protection of human rights in 21st centuries. I request all the participants to mute. So only let the honorable speakers, otherwise there is some kind of disturbance. So I request all the participants to mute. And sir, just to brief you that you have 45 to 1 hour, like as long as you want, no problem. And if you permit after that, we can take some questions from the respected members. So over to you, sir. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Sinha. I am very pleased to meet you again via the Zoom. And I am very pleased to meet all of you who are participating in this event. Now, what I want to do is to have a conversation with you. Bahut softly, hai, and then we will have a conversation afterwards. Now, if you look at this lecture is in the context of India's independence, the 75th anniversary of India's independence. And I had occasion some while back to read a book by two books by Professor Dennis Dalton, who was a professor of political science at Columbia University. And he taught also in Nepal, and he taught also in India. And he wrote first a book, Indian Idea of Freedom. It was published in Haryana in 1962. And then later on, he published a book on Gandhi. And it's a fascinating, in the book on Indian Idea of Freedom, he traces the freedom ideas of 4 great Indian authors: Vivekananda, Aurobindo, Gandhi, and Rabindranath Tagore. And Dalton puts his finger on the subject matter. He says that in the history of Indian philosophy, there was a lot of emphasis on the internal dimensions of freedom. The individual's souls, the soul of the individual, seeking harmony with the world Atman. And Dalton says that Vivekananda, Aurobindo, Gandhi, and Rabindranath Tagore, they tried to take some European ideas from the Enlightenment as India marched in the struggle for independence, and to develop ideas of constitutionalism, ideas of the rule of law, and ideas of governance that are grounded in dignity and respect for the individual. So now you have this wonderful legacy, you have this wonderful history of freedom, internal freedom, external freedom, and the synthesis of these two. Now, about the time when India was attaining its independence in 1947, the United Nations was starting in 1945. And you are students, you are great students of international law and human rights. I don't need to tell you this. The Charter of the United Nations has strong provisions when it comes to respect for human rights globally, respect for human rights without discrimination. And then now, in San Francisco, the founding conference.
अरे कोई भी जीन पैंट पहन ले उसके ऊपर से पिंक कलर का शर्ट या येलो शर्ट पहन.
Jayas, I think unmute, please.
Yeah, so and San Francisco in 1945, the San Francisco conference asked the Commission on Human Rights, which is established, to work on an international Bill of Rights. And the commission decided that this bill would have 3 parts: the Declaration, 1 or more treaties, and quote, measures of implementation. Now, the representative of India on the Commission on Human Rights, when it drafted the Universal Declaration, was Mrs. Hansa Mehta. And I have looked at the records. She was a person of great distinction, great conviction. And Mrs. Hansa, I have done a text of this lecture, which I hope Professor Sinha will share with you, and you will see that I cite Hansa Mehta in the text. Hansa Mehta is saying, among other things, the following: we have to make sure that we implement human rights. We must not only declare human rights, but we must actually implement them. Secondly, we have to operate on the basis of dignity and equality of every individual, regardless of gender. And then to collapse, long story short, India, in its formal submissions to the United Nations as it was drafting the Universal Declaration, India submitted ideas that the Security Council of the United Nations should be given a role in the enforcement of human rights. Why am I telling you this story? My subject before you is the protection of human rights in the 21st century. And you know that based on the Charter of the United Nations, based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, based on the various treaties, based on international customary law, based on the pronouncements of the International Court of Justice, there is a body of law that we have all inherited that is applicable to all parts of the world. And so now my first point to you is that as we go into the remainder of the 21st century, we must take forward this body of law. We must build upon this body of law. And in Mrs. Mehta's words, we must implement this body of law. So I ask you to keep in your mind's eye the idea that we must build upon the existing international law of human rights. Then the second thing I ask you to keep in mind is the following: the world is changing before our very eyes, and new problems are coming up. In the text of my talk, I looked at a few of these. If you Google something called the Neuro Rights Foundation, it is a new foundation based in New York, established by Columbia University professor of biology. There are so many experimentation on the human brain and on the human personality that they are articulating the idea that we need a declaration on neuro rights for safeguarding the integrity and the personality of the individual. And you are in India, you are an advanced technology country, computers, satellites. Nowadays, artificial intelligence is coming so close to the intersection with human beings. And we have to think through this issue of the singularity, which is the kind of approximation of computers and human beings. And then, of course, there are books written on the issue of cybersecurity. As you know this better than I do, there are so many intrusions into the privacy of the individual. We have to think about these things. And then there are issues such as human beings are consider that increasingly they will have a future in outer space. What is the ground rule when it comes to human rights in outer space? In my paper, I draw attention to some of these issues. You may have ideas of topics in respect of which you think that, yes, we have to further develop the law as we go along. So I place before you my second submission that in addition to building on the existing international law of human rights, we will have to progressively develop the law in the light of conditions in the 21st century. Then the third thing I want to say to you is we have to.
अंकुश आप बंद करो अंकुश अपना वो चेतन आप भी बंद कीजिए क्या लगा
ठीक है अच्छा राम राम
नीना आप देखो कहाँ से आवाज करते हैं सर प्लीज गो
was my last hope. I'm going to be deported, sent home in disgrace, exposed to the sardonic bounds of my cousin Sanjay, or as you may know him, Dave from AT&T Customer Service.
अनुराग जी किसके से बज रहा है चेतन का म्यूट करें प्लीज चेतन वत्स चेतन क्या sorry sir please sir go ahead sir.
All right. So far I have said to you, so far I have said to you that as we go into the 21st century, as we continue in the 21st century, we have to build on the foundations of existing international human rights law. And then I have said that we have to progressively develop the law to keep in mind new issues that are coming up. And of course, I have not mentioned things like environmental degradation, climate change, mass movement of people across frontiers. What are the human rights regime of the future that will govern these issues? The third thing I want to say to you is that it comes under the rubric of human dignity and human development. The opening article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Think about this word of dignity. Look around you in your own country. I was born and raised in Guyana. By the way, I intended to mention that born and raised in Guyana, of course, Lata Mangeshkar was our idol. And so and then when I was a boy, I used to have to go and wave the flag of India on India Independence Day. Watan ki raah hame watan ki nao jawan shaheed ho. We had to sing that. So now I congratulate you on your independence. I congratulate you on Lata Mangeshkar, this great soul. And
thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. And I ask you to think about this word of dignity. And when you study Gandhi, I want to cite something that Gandhi said. It's in the written text of the lecture that I gave you. And Gandhi says, the individuals must take responsibility for a change of attitude to overcome three major problems in Indian society. And the three major problems that Gandhi mentioned were Hindu-Muslim religious conflict, the evils of caste and untouchability, and economic inequality. Well, I am not coming at Indian conditions. I am addressing the issue of dignity and development in the world. A country like India has made massive improvements in improving human dignity. But you know as well as I do that there is still a long road to travel in India, in China, in my country, Guyana, and in other parts of the world. And then there is this issue of equality. Some years ago, and I'm not sure when I was invited by the EU-India Security Foundation to come and give a speech in New Delhi. And after the conference on security issues, I took a car and I traveled around for about a week around India, and I found myself in Agra. I didn't actually go into the Taj Mahal, but if you go, forgive me if I mention what you know. If you go to the Jamuna River, across the river from the Taj Mahal, you can see the Taj Mahal from a distance. And there is there a statue of one of the drafters of your constitution, Ambedkar. And under the statute of Ambedkar, there is an inscription, a quote from Ambedkar: educate, organize, and agitate. Well, now, the point I'm making to you here, if I may, is that we have worldwide to address this issue of human dignity and human development. Now, in human development, the United Nations had first the Millennium Development Goals. The United Nations then succeeded those with the Sustainable Development Goals. And now, because of conditions in the pandemic, the world is very much behind when it comes to implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. But what I'm saying to you, if I may, I wrote a monograph for the University of Cape Town some time back called National Implementation of the Right to Development. I ask you to keep this issue in mind. How does one make the right to development a reality for every individual in the world? We may discuss this perhaps as we go along. And then the final thing that I want to say to you, if I may, is that as we go forward with existing international human rights law, as we progressively develop the law, as we address issues of dignity, equality, and development, we have to keep in mind all the time Mrs. Hansa Mehta's injunction to the Commission on Human Rights of the United Nations. We must not only declare rights, but we must implement rights. And this theme of implementation. When he was alive and he used to come to the United Nations, the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of India, Prof. Chandra Bhagwati, I knew him rather well. He used to come home here and we used to have many conversations. You know of his contribution in the development of the social action jurisprudence of the Indian Supreme Court. What I would like to say is that I've just written a book called Modernizing the Role of the International Court of Justice. And in this book, I look a bit more closely at four great courts: the International Court of Justice, the US Supreme Court, the Indian Supreme Court, and the South African Constitutional Court. What I say to you is that unless we have the rule of law nationally, regionally, and internationally, we will never realize human rights faithfully in the world. So allow me to speak to you as someone born and raised in Guyana, addressing you in India with your great traditions of freedom and spirituality and constitutionalism and the rule of law. I say to you with great humility that you must safeguard the role of the Supreme Court. You must safeguard the rule of law inside your country, as indeed we must do in all countries. So let me conclude this. The challenge for India and for the rest of the world remains to implement the rights in your constitution and in international agreements. Our starting point must remain the national and international rule of law. The Indian Supreme Court has a great history of upholding the rule of law. It is vital to safeguard and to deepen this. We must take forward and progressively develop international human rights law. If humans are to have a future on Earth, we must protect environmental rights. We must protect the planet. We must continue to protect people. Unfortunately, human beings continue to suffer massive violations of human rights in numerous countries. Protecting human rights against gross violations will remain a pressing challenge of our times. We must protect threatened groups such as minorities and indigenous populations. I don't need to tell you about, forgive me for mentioning it, the need for continuing vigilance when it comes to the Dalits in India. We must protect minorities and indigenous populations. We must protect women and children and assure them full equality. I don't know how many of you will remember the film Piazza. And then Piazza has a song there where the singer is making the case for the dignity and equality of India's women. We must safeguard human dignity and foster human development. We must foster human security and implement the right to development. We must enhance our protection systems nationally, regionally, and internationally. And I want to conclude on this point. Unless a country has an effective national protection system, it will be very hard to uphold respect for human rights in the spirit and in the law. I thank you very much, and now I'm ready to have a dialogue with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Professor Ramcharan. It's indeed a lot of new factors, a lot of new points which you have highlighted, and I will come back later on while summarizing this, like your talk. But so let me start with requesting the participants. If you have any questions, sir is there, and you raise your hand, or you can put in chat box also, so I can read it out. Any one of you? Nivedita?
Waste this day. One point.
Sivesh, you are not audible. You can put your, so Nivedita has no question, so you can put in the chat. Shoril, you have, Achha, Chetan has asked one question. How does it protect us at a workplace? Like, I believe what he means. How human rights he means,
Yeah.
like, protect at workplace.
Well, it's a very important question. And so I would like to give you a slightly longer answer. When the League of Nations was established in 1919, the International Labour Organization was established at the same time. And the International Labour Organization took the lead in the development of standards for the protection of workers at home, in the factories, and in their workplaces. And this entire body of laws developed by the International Labour Organization, they have an elaborate system which includes the following. First of all, I will use India. India will ratify many of the labor conventions. India will ratify conventions against child labor. India will ratify, I'm using India as an example. Let me say Guyana, I take it back to me. Guyana will ratify the conventions of the International Labor Organization on things like child labor, length of working hours, grievance procedures for workers who have grievances. And then now the ILO, it's a long thing. I will ask Professor Sinha maybe to share with you some references afterwards on the ILO system. The ILO has 3 bodies. The ILO has 3 bodies that you will need to keep in mind. First of all, the ILO has
Bertrand
committee.
Ramcharan. तो वो Bertrand direct UP.
हेलो, अरे आप थोड़ा सा उसको प्लीज थोड़ा ऑफ कर,
Why are you even attending?
1 मिनट जरा सा ऑफ कर लो, म्यूट कर लीजिए प्लीज. Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
I was saying that, but let me summarize this. First of all, you need to know what the ILO conventions and recommendations are, first thing. Secondly, the ILO will have a regional office in India, and you can brief yourself on the ILO system. Thirdly, every year, the ILO Committee on the Application of Standards meets to review reports from all states on how they are giving effect to the ILO conventions. Fourthly, the ILO has specific procedures. They have a committee on freedom of association. And if you feel that their trade union rights are being hampered, you can write to the ILO. And then thirdly, the ILO has something called the ILO Commission of Inquiry. About 5-6 years ago, this is the highest instance in the ILO. About 6, maybe 7 years ago, I participated as a member of the ILO Commission of Inquiry into the situation of labor rights in Zimbabwe. So as a concrete answer to you, I would say to you, inform yourself about the ILO conventions and about the ILO procedures for the protection of workers' rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And now we have a couple of questions like, would be future agenda of peace in international criminal justice in coming years? Do you see future agenda of peace in international criminal justice in coming years?
I'm not sure that I fully understand the question, but I will try. I will give an answer and then you can come back with me. First of all, when Secretary General Boutros Ghali was Secretary General, he presented before the United Nations Security Council a historic document called An Agenda for Peace. If you let me say so, I wrote the first draft. I was the head of the speechwriting service of the UN Secretary General, and I prepared the first draft of this document. And what Secretary General Boutros Ghali said was, we must work for peace building. We must work to prevent conflicts. We must work for peacemaking, to negotiate peace, and we must develop United Nations peacekeeping. So if you keep these 4 words in mind, preventive diplomacy, peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building, Agenda for Peace tried to develop ideas in these areas. Now, then, of course, in parallel to this is the international human rights regime and methods of sanctions, including sanctions at the domestic level, and now the International Criminal Court. So let me interpret your question in this way, or let me give you this answer. I think that it is important to act for justice for the victims of gross violations of human rights. That is a point of departure. Then now how we can act for justice for the victims of violations of human rights? First of all, national legal procedures. Second, international petitions procedures. Third, representations at the UN Human Rights Council. And then now we have the International Criminal Court. Unfortunately, the International Criminal Court has experienced a backlash, especially from countries in Africa. And let me be quite candid with you. Countries like China, the United States, India, Russia, they are not subscribing to the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court because they have their own political issues to keep in mind. So let me give you that answer. And if I have not met your question, please come back to me.
I think this question was what you have answered. That was the correct answer for the question which was raised by Pawan. We have next question by just a second, sir. Yeah, Bashudha has asked, is there any role of human rights in sports as it is based on belief that man and other genders are inherently different and not equal? This has also led to certain medical testing which are against the dignity of other genders.
So now, to the general question, I would say yes, there is a role for human rights in sports. I want to tell you, if I may, a little story. If you look at the Olympic Games, or if you look at international games, football, maybe even cricket, etc., you will see a big sign marked respect. And this idea of respect, there was a man working at the United Nations when I was there, and he asked to see me. And he said, I have an idea that I would like to sell to the International Olympics Committee, namely that sport must be used as a way to promote respect for the dignity and equality of every human being. And he succeeded dramatically. This was one individual, a type of Gandhi who had an idea. So in that context, yes, sports can promote understanding and respect for each human being. Now, the other aspect of this that you raise is something that I will have to think about. It is a question of deep philosophy. When the Olympic Games were, I don't know enough about your country, India, in the history, but I'm sure that in the history of India, athletics competition would have been a feature of your history, as it was a feature of the history of the Greeks when they developed what came to be the Olympics. I'm not sure of the answer I'm giving you here. So I will ask for some tolerance from you as I give this answer. I would like to think that the idea of sports competition is not necessarily to highlight the gaps between individuals, but rather to encourage human beings to strive to the maximum of their potential. Let me conclude this answer in this way. If you look at the literature, the philosophical literature on the concept of equality, the concept of equality doesn't mean that we each of us have the same physical or mental attributes. What it tells us is that we have equality in recognition of each other as human beings. Then we get into a very difficult subject, in the philosophy of Plato and his 4 categories of people according to their natural endowments: the philosophers, the soldiers, the commercial people, and the people who work the fields. Forgive me, I don't know much about these things. I was born in Guyana, and forgive me for mentioning it, but your caste system, I'm not attacking that in any way. I'm saying fundamentally, it is at the root of it is this recognition that, like Plato did, that human beings have different innate attributes. So now, this is as far as I can go with this question about sports and human rights. Forgive me, I have to. Socrates was fond of saying that his greatest attribute was that he knew nothing. So I want to be like Socrates now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I think there are many questions, so quickly we have to take it. The next one is by Chetan. So Chetan has asked, if someone is harassing or exploiting at workplace mentally, what specific role of human rights is available national and international level?
Well, now I'm going to give you a theoretical answer. I'm going to give you an answer as if it would be my country. And by analogy, you can reason for your own country. First of all, one would go to one's bosses and see if there's any remedy there. If not, one would see if there's a labor commissioner in the area, and one could go to the labor commissioner. If not, one could see if there is a human rights commission that one could make a petition to. So in your case, India has a dramatically good National Human Rights Commission. So I would say reasoning, look for where you may have an avenue of recourse near to you, that's to say, going as far possibly as to the Indian Human Rights Commission. It is a short answer, but I'm cutting my answer short a bit. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so next is by Jayesh. Do you think corruption and ecocide should be included as crimes against humanity?
I want to answer the second one, ecocide. There is a group of international lawyers who have come out with a report arguing precisely that ecocide should be recognized as a crime against humanity. Professor Philip Sands of University College London, who was a specialist in international environmental law, is one of those who has written, who was part of this group. So ecocide, my immediate answer is yes. Corruption. I think that my first thoughts are that there are different grades and levels of corruption. So let us say that let us say a middle-level employee takes a bribe. I think it would be hard to say that that should be made a crime against humanity. On the other hand, if a national leader steals the entire wealth of the country and parks it in banks outside, might that rise to the level of a crime against humanity? I think we would have to take this on a case-by-case basis. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So Akanksha has asked, everyone is talking about human rights protection.
Yeah.
The reality is something else. How do you see the problem of human rights violation in Afghanistan in the 21st century?
I would like to give you the following answer. I spent 3.5 years during the wars in the former Yugoslavia from 1992 to 1996. I was with the peacemakers, the negotiators, with the peacekeepers. And so why am I mentioning this? I have been in situations of war and peace. Then now, when you look at the situation like Afghanistan, you have to ask yourself the following questions. Who holds power in Afghanistan? Where does the power lie? Who's supporting those in power? How can one influence those in power? How can one get people to change their mental attitudes grounded in an understanding of their religion? I want to digress for a moment. Take the situation in Myanmar. Many people think that what the military.
Kindly mute please 787 FA635, please mute. आप म्यूट कर लो बेटा. चलिए. Yes sir, please sir, go ahead.
I'm digressing to Myanmar for a moment. What the military junta did in Myanmar is without a doubt a grave violation of human rights. Then think, who can possibly have an impact on the junta? The Myanmar army is 500,000. China, India, the United States, they all have major strategic interests in Myanmar. So at the end of the day, that's why I mentioned that I was in peace negotiations. There are some situations where it's not enough to kind of invoke human rights. You have to go into negotiated solutions. Now, turning back to Afghanistan, there is a book called The Bookseller of Kabul. It is written by a Norwegian journalist, and it tells of the situation in Afghanistan after the fall, after the overthrow of the king, and then under the Taliban. And now, of course, by extension, it doesn't cover the current situation, but by extension, it will cover the present situation. I have thought about this situation. And of course, we have difficult issues of principle to deal with. Here we have people who have taken power, who have a certain understanding of their religion. I'm not saying that they are right or wrong. I'm just telling you they have a certain understanding of their religion. And there next to them is a neighboring power that gives them some support. And so now, what does the human rights person do about this situation? I have to give you a straight answer. Preaching about human rights doesn't help in this situation. We have to develop some form of dialogue and some form of dialogue to kind of gradually get those who hold power in the country to move in the direction of tolerance and understanding. It's a बहुत difficult question, but I've given you the best answer I can.
Thank you, sir. So now we have Resma. She has asked you, how do we address the identity, security, and equity crisis faced by minorities in India from the human rights perspective?
I want to give you the following answer. In giving you this answer, I must admit that I do not know enough about Indian conditions, so I'm giving you a kind of a generalized answer. From where I'm seated, I would say first, I would call upon the Indian National Human Rights Commission. Perhaps they have done this. I'm not aware, but I'm giving you a frame of answers there. I will call upon them to put out a study of the situations of minorities in India. First thing. Second thing, I would look to the Indian Commission on Human Rights to offer recommendations.
आप थोड़ा 61 CLM. Thank you. Please, sir, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm saying that let the Indian National Commission on Human Rights do an open study on the situation of minorities in India. First thing. Secondly, let it identify groups that are particularly in need of protection. Third, I want to be very open with you. Let the Indian Supreme Court play its role. Professor Sinha, as I was reflecting on my talk, I was thinking that I should read a bit more on the recent human rights jurisprudence of the Indian Supreme Court. And perhaps you will send me an email or so recommending me a text or so. It's just something that I would like to dig into deeper. I have in mind a contemporary situation that is very much in the news media. And I will not mention the situation, but it has to do with the rights of a minority and the rights of so. My immediate thought is that this is a situation where the Indian Supreme Court should enter the picture, call for a fact-finding report, hold hearings on the issue, and come up, if need be, with recommendations for the protection of this minority. I'm repeating myself. I knew very well Chief Justice Bhagwati, and I think that Chief Justice Bhagwati, I have very near to me here some of his writing. I think that Chief Justice Bhagwati, as Chief Justice of India, would have the principal guts to say, okay, this is a situation where the Indian Supreme Court should enter into fact-finding and pronounce. Now, there are some issues that I'm avoiding to enter. You have governance with a certain complexion right now, and I, as a human rights man, I want to tell you, if I may, a little story. I just read a book called Remnants of Partition. It is written by a journalist, author called Malhotra, and she has 21 stories of people who experience the partition. And in one of these stories, she's interviewing a Muslim in Delhi who chose not to leave India. And in the interview, you can read it for yourself. He says to Ms. Malhotra, this India is my India. I am born here. I will die here. And so now what I'm saying is that I think that this great India, and remember what Gandhi said, this Muslim Hindu thing, I have some anxieties about the way, about the texture of some of what's happening in your country right now. And the only answer I can give is let the Indian Supreme Court play its role. About long, but I'm very sorry.
Thank you. So I believe the last question we have from Richa. She's asking about the Madagascar. Madagascar recently faced what the UN called the first climate change famine in 2020.
Yeah.
Though it was challenged later in the year with people facing starvation, a violation of their right to food. Sir, what is your take on using human rights in climate action?
I am very much in favor of using human rights in climate action. In a book that will come out, a book of mine that will come out in a month or two, published by the Asser Institute in The Hague. It's called Modernizing the Role of the International Court of Justice. And there I'm linking this. I identified 3 issues where I think that I present 2 thoughts. First, the political organs of the United Nations are not, like the General Assembly, the Security Council, and the Human Rights Council, they are not able to do justice to these issues. And secondly, that human rights norms must influence us. And these 3 issues are climate change, which you mentioned, vaccine equity, and mass movements of people across frontiers. Think about it. Let me take the last issue. The estimates are that hundreds of millions of people might be forced to flee across frontiers as the oceans rise or as deserts increase. Right now, we do not have a regime in international law to, or at the United Nations to pronounce on these issues. I think that the right to life is our starting point there. And the situation in Madagascar, for example, yes, of course, human rights apply, but then comes the practical question. When we say that the people of Madagascar have the right to life, that's a beautiful human rights statement. Then how do we implement it? Now, humanitarian appeals, humanitarian action is funded by voluntary contributions. So now this is a very difficult issue about how do we act on humanitarian impulses when the monetary contributions are not forthcoming. we have to think through this, but my clear answer is that, yeah, you know that I want to leave you with this thought. We must all work for what I call human rights strategies of governance. In all parts of governance, human rights should be the starting point. Bahut difficult question, but I have tried.
Super. So I think this is last question from Sives. He asked, we have been observing that few people, organization misuse human rights, and how should we deal with it?
It probably is the case that some organizations misuse human rights. I will not deny it. In many countries of the world, they established their own non-governmental organizations to do lobbying for them. And these are called GONGOs, governmental, G-O, non-governmental organization. So in my time at the United Nations, I witnessed many debates where GONGOs sponsored by one country engage in attacks on another country, and vice versa. At the end of the day, the only answer I have is that, well, I have to give you a Gandhian truth. The truth shall make you free. And so therefore, we have to gather the information and publish the information. Let the truth be told. And I think that in the end, truth will win. What is the word of Gandhi for truth? What is Gandhi's? So a Gandhian answer to this situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramcharan. And just to quickly to sum up your talk in a few seconds or few minutes, you started with your talk in a very a journey you traced from the United Nations Charter. And I have a question, and you, I think, the right person to answer also. Charter, it did not use anywhere the term protect. It's a promote and encourage human rights and fundamental freedoms. And it has also not defined human rights, what human rights means, what fundamental freedoms mean. It says key states are encouraged, promote and encourage respect to human rights and fundamental freedoms, which is started from the preamble, article 13, 13, 1B, 52, 56, 55, 56, and then 60, I think 68 and 72. There's 6-7 places, more or less it's repeated there. So this is one I have noticed, which will ask you later on. So somewhere charter avoided, which sir you will be able to answer. And regarding the country, then you mentioned about the contribution of Hansa Mehta, and Hansa Mehta, as sir you know that she has played very important role in the all men are born free. Initially the article 1 in the UDHR, and she played very important role in this, Hansa Mehta. And there is another lady which equally play a very important role in the equality, particularly in the third committee when just draft has gone, Lakshmi Menon from the Indian lady. She also, and I think then when the Nuclear Commission was constituted of 9 members in 1946, then another Indian was also there some day, or the 3 persons. So Indian played very important role in development, and I'm sure we all are going to read, but unfortunately Indian scholarship has not been devoted so much time since we work little bit. So I got this idea about there are a lot of things which we have to unravel. I think Indian scholarship is required, and because of your writing we'll get some kind of help also. You have also mentioned about the challenges which in the 21st century, particularly which somebody calls future human rights, the 4th generation human rights. Okay, the technology which are there, we have to prepare ourselves in the 4th generation human rights, that the future human rights. And what you have mentioned, of course, there are a lot of challenges, artificial intelligence, scientific, medical profession, it is there. And you also sir mentioned about the MDG, social, SDG, and emphasize on the important 3 pillars, which I can, dignity, equality, and development, in the. And we all look forward for your book, which you have authored, where you have focused on the modernizing the role of International Court of Justice, the US Supreme Court, Indian Supreme Court, and South African Court. So we will love to have a copy in our library, and we'll try to review if you wish so. What you have also given us, like an alerted, not only us, to all of the other members, as a member of the United Nations working there, two important requirement or necessary ingredient for the promotion and protection of human rights are role of the court. Basically, I'll not put the Indian court, role of the courts, and independence of the court, basically independence of judiciary and rule of law. If these two are there, then promotion of human rights will be strengthened domestically. And you also said that there is a particularly a nation, I put more in general, has a greater responsibility to ensure the protection of the rights of the minorities, women, children, and weaker indigenous people, weaker sections of the society. That will be the that requires special attention from the state to address the concern of these marginalized sections of the society, weaker section of the society, or vulnerable, whatever we put. And you also suggested in your presentation about which we go back to the 1991. In fact, we can go back to the 1976 when Commission on Human Rights, I believe in the month of September, in the first meeting in the Geneva, where they had decided about the strengthening of national human rights institution in 1976, which somehow where states participated, in India participated. But actually the next step which took place in Paris in 7th to 9th October 1991, where the Paris principles which developed and subsequently Commission on Human Rights, and later in 1993, UN General Assembly also passed 48, I think, /134 resolution of 1993. And then and that was passed in the, sir, you'll be happy to know that the resolution was passed in the 20th December 1993. But India, among the few countries in the world, established Human Rights Commission, so National Human Rights Commission, which you have focused on 28 September 1993. So we were among the few countries in the world which an established national institution for protection of human rights. I'm sure that a lot of points you have said and discussed, and your paper we have got it, which will give a final shape and bring before you before it goes to the press for publication on there. It was wonderful for all of us. And the two questions primarily: one, the role of the United Nations, and the second, when we talk about the human rights, and there's a distinction also, but this human rights applies in the peacetime. And the things which bother me, if you see that recently in the Sudan, Guinea-Bissau, in Africa, number of countries, there is a coup d'etat. All of a sudden, just last couple of days, we have seen a lot of changes. The response of the United Nations, particularly Security Council, which have primary responsibility for maintenance of international peace and security, and second, Office of the High Commissioner, response are very slow or very late. Some way it's not timely. Crisis, and after a little bit of a gap, and then their statement comes. Even statements are not effective. Whether it's a diplomatic reason is there or certain other factors, if you enlighten us, that will be great.
Well, thank you, Professor Sinha. So first of all, on protection, you are right that the word protection does not appear in the Charter. I will give you one answer briefly. I think that protection has now developed in international customary law. The capacity of the United. I wrote a book many years ago called "The Concept and Present Status of the International Protection of Human Rights," 1988. And so since then 2 years ago, I wrote a book called "The Advent of Universal Protection of Human Rights." And I cut a long story short, I think that a protection capacity has developed through practice, and it is now part of customary international. First thing. Secondly, what you say about the military coups and the response of the United Nations, the response of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I would answer you in the following way. Historically, the United Nations, like the African Union, took a very principled position against coups, military coups in Africa. Secondly, when Secretary General Annan was Secretary General, he went to the African Union at the time, and he really condemned these coups. Thirdly, in contrast to previous times, the Security Council has been meeting to discuss coups in places like Mali and on Burkina Faso and whatnot. Keep in mind that the Security Council can only meet on an issue if the membership agrees. And if the veto powers disagree, then a meeting will not take place. So that what I'm saying to you is that I think it is an advance that even though it is not dramatically, it is not dramatic in its effect, the Security Council has been willing to discuss these coups. And then finally, the High Commissioner, you know, let me just tell you, so I performed the functions of High Commissioner for 1 year. So, and every morning I would ask for reports. I would listen to the radio. What are the situations that require that the High Commissioner should express a concern about? And then if you think that there is a situation that requires your response, you have to get the facts right. It takes a while to get a briefing paper. These are the facts. And then to make a comment based on the facts. Because the worst thing you can do is to make a comment on the basis of incorrect facts. So that's what I think would explain the High Commissioner coming out a bit later on. And then finally, I would say to you that the United Nations is not like Lord Krishna. Lord Krishna can decide, okay, Lord Krishna can have a dramatic transformation of the situation. The United Nations works as best it can with the limited capacity that it has. So I like that answer. The United Nations is not Lord Krishna.
Thank you, sir. So we are come to the end, and I would like my colleague, Dr. Professor Jyoti, Professor Anurag Deep, and joins you to thank you, profusely thanking you for this wonderful talk today. I would also take opportunity to thank our alumni association. So this last minute change, and then also the Zoom, it has been created by our former student, and they have association. So they are very nice. I called in a few minutes, they created, and that is the reason we had. So RC Minaji, Puneet, and all members, thank you very much for helping us today in conducting this particular webinar. And despite whatever the initial technical hitch we had, we overcame and and we are here, and we heard you, sir. It was wonderful, and we look forward for your continuous academic support, or whenever you visit to India, we'll be very happy to have you with us in the institute and other universities in India. So thank you very much, sir, for your time and your wonderful talk, which I believe strongly that helped all of us to understand, and particularly the last word, United Nations is not Lord Krishna. So we got an answer. So we have to accept that reality. Don't completely think, so it will perform like, so it has its own limitation for various reasons. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Jai
Thank you,
Hind.
Professor. Thank you so much.
Okay. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
sir.
All the best. Thank you now. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
So we can, sir, thank you, everyone. So we are closing now.
Okay, sir.
Thanks to you, you also, sir.
Thank you, Anurag ji. Thank you very much. And Meena ji ने आज काफी मदद की हम लोगों की.
That was a great help.
Thank you.